Animated video backgrounds can add a layer of visual interest to your online learning production. Traditionally, these have been somewhat difficult to create, and most people don't know you can actually create them in Photoshop in just a few steps. Let's take a look at the file I have open. The file has 3 layers. On layer 1, we have a photo of the instructor, in this case, me. Layer 2 and layer 3 are duplicates. And if we were to zoom out a little bit and hit Control T, you can see that there's actually much more to the layer than you can see here. It actually extends out beyond the portion of the image that we can see. So these 2 layers are duplicates. If we go down to the next layer, you can see it's the same. And all I'm going to do is use the Move tool to shift this over to the left. So we're just seeing a different part of that image. And if we press enter, we'll save it. And if I take out the layer on top, so there we've got the bottom texture layer, and here we've got the top texture layer. And we're just going to use these 2 to create a subtle animation effect. Let's work with the top texture layer first. So I'm going to select that layer, and you notice on the bottom here, I've got my timeline panel. And there's a button that says Create Video Timeline. We're going to do just that. And what the video timeline will do is allow us to make changes to our layers over time. Now, right now, this is a 5-second timeline. Let's extend this out to 10 seconds. And all we're going to do is drag to the right till we get to 10 seconds. And we'll do this on all of the relevant layers right now. So there we go, 10 seconds. And let's do this to, of course, to our bottom layers as well. So we've extended out the layer with the instructor on it. And now we'll extend out the texture layers. Layer 0 we really don't need at this point. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that layer. And when I delete that layer, you'll see it disappears off of the timeline. So again, the timeline allows us to change the status of a layer over time. So working with the top layer, I'm going to click this arrow pointed to the right next to the layer thumbnail in the timeline. And you'll notice there's 3 types of changes we can make. We can do transformations, and you'll remember transformations are any change we can do here in position, scale, skew, etc. We can do opacity changes, and we can make style changes. And we're actually just going to transform the position over time. So I'm going to click the stopwatch on the left of the transform layer, and that'll put this diamond right here. And this diamond is essentially a transition point. Let's move to 5 seconds. And let's drop another diamond right there. Just click on the diamond tool. And what we're going to do at this point is I'm going to move the whole layer over to the right. So what we've done is we've essentially created, you can see the motion in the background here, a little bit of motion on this layer between these 2 points. If I press the space bar, you can see the motion occurring. Again, you want very subtle. This might even be a little too fast. Now, what we're going to want to do is by the end of the animation, switch it back to where we started, because again, this animation is going to be a loop. So let's move the playhead to our 10-second point here at the end. We'll drop another point right here on the transform line, and now we're going to shift it back to where it was originally. So I'm going to hit Control T and move it back right here. Press enter. So now if we watch the whole animation on that layer, this is what we get. Layer moving to the left for 5 seconds. And then when we reach the 5-second point, the layer will start moving to the right and move back. This way we can loop it over and over again. Now, we also can change the opacity of the layer. Because remember, there's another layer that's identical beneath this first layer. So I'm actually going to start the opacity here at 50%. And you'll be able to see subtly the layer behind this one. So it actually makes the motion a little more subtle. You can see this layer is more transparent now. Now, if we also add motion to the layer below it using the same technique, we can have an interesting animated background. So let's move to the bottom layer, and we're going to go through the same process. So making sure our playhead is at 0, we're going to click the stopwatch on transform to drop the first keyframe. Again, making sure we have the bottom layer selected. And this time, we're going to move to 5 seconds. Move the keyframe, or move the playhead, I should say. You're going to have to drag that. So let's drag that to 5 seconds. And then we're going to drop another keyframe right there. And because we've dropped this keyframe, we now can move this guy over to the right like that and press enter. So now if we only look at the bottom layer, we'll hide the top layer where we put the motion before. You can see the motion on the bottom layer. And if we show both layers, we'll have kind of a more interesting effect, I think, now because of the transparency on the top layer. So we have 2 layers in motion. And now we've got a very subtle, I think, nice background motion. So we got to finish up our bottom layer. We got to move it back because right now at the 5-second point, all of a sudden the bottom layer will be still and won't return to where we started. So I'll press the space bar to stop the preview of the motion. Again, ensuring I'm on the bottom layer. Let's go ahead and move to the 10-second point, and we'll drop our last diamond representing the keyframe. Keyframe is just where something happens along the timeline. So now we're going to want to take the bottom layer and move it back to its starting point. Press enter. That always saves your transformation. All right, so now we've got, I think, a nice kind of subtle, interesting effect in the background. And of course, this instructor could be video. You could be using voiceover here. There's a number of things you could do to make this more interesting. Now, let's just add one more bit of interest. Let's take this middle layer again, and let's vary the opacity as we go through the 10-second loop. So let's go ahead and close that layer and open the top layer of background. So we're going to use the same technique with opacity. Let's drop a keyframe right there at 0. Remember, right now we're at a 50% opacity. You can see that right here. And at 5 seconds, let's change that opacity to 25%. So again, drop a keyframe, make your change, so opacity 25%, and it's just going to add us a little more interest to the effect. All right, and then at 10 seconds, we'll drop our final keyframe on opacity, and we'll set that back to 50, again, so we have the complete loop. We can preview the final effect by moving this back to the playhead back to 0. And now we can see the final effect of the opacity and the movement together. All right, so let's save this as a Photoshop file. And I'm just going to save this on my desktop for convenience right now. I've already got the file name loop.psd. Now, a PSD file is not a file that can contain motion. It's not a video file. So what we've actually got to do now is export this as a video. So if I go to File, Export, you'll see down here, Render Video. Now, this is kind of a slow process because this is not Photoshop's primary skill is in video export. But if there are a few moments, we'll actually have got this file as a video file that you can play in any video player, or you can bring into a video editor. So now our options for rendering the video are available to us. We have the name and the folder, but then we have how the video is encoded, and you're going to want to check with whoever's editing your video or whatever standards that your organization requires for video. We're going to export this at 1920 by 1080, which was the original size of our image, and that's HD, of course. We're going to set the frame rate to 30 FPS, which is pretty standard, and we'll leave the rest of the defaults alone. So when I click render, render, now the rendering tool is actually going to render the video. Now, depending on the length of the video, this could take several minutes. Once the video has stopped rendering, you will have an MP4 video file that you can play with any video player, or you can import into a larger project to edit in software like Adobe Premiere. But this is the actual video that we were able to create using Photoshop by itself. And now you can see the nice kind of smooth loop in the background behind the instructor. You might want to slow this down or make changes to it, or try some different graphics. But that's the basic technique to creating a video background that's animated using Photoshop. Have fun with this.